Hello and welcome to Functional Skills Masterclass with me, Bill Haining. In this section, we are going to look at fractions. Now, there are 8 skills in fractions that you need to learn for your exams. So let's get into them. So we're going to look at equivalent, simplifying and comparing, right? When working with equivalent fraction and simplifying fractions, you must multiply or divide the top and bottom numbers by the same number. So let's have a look at that. Okay, let's have a look at equivalent fractions. All right, let's take 5 over 10 and create an equivalent fraction. And we do this by multiplying both numbers by the same value. And if you can see, once you do that, you can do 5 times 5 is 25, 10 times 5 is 50, and that's creating the equivalent fraction of 25 over 50. And hopefully you can see that both these numbers are the exact same as a half. So 5 is half of 10, 25 is half of 50. So if you take this shape here, for example, and you cut it into 50 equal parts, then 25 of these parts will just take up the same space within that shape. Okay, and that's why it's called an equivalent fraction. It just takes up the same space within a shape. Now let's look at simplifying. The exact same principles apply to simplifying. All right, we simplify fractions to make them easier to manage. So you bring it down to its lowest equivalent fraction. And we do that by finding a common number between the top and bottom. In this case, it's 4. So we divide both numbers by 4, and that gives you the fraction a half. And you can see from the image here that 4/8 is the exact same as a half. It just takes up the same space. It just depends how many times you cut that whole value up into different fractions. Finally, in this part is comparing fractions. Now there is a complex way of converting fractions to the same number and working out the value. But the easiest and simplest way is just convert them to a decimal, then compare. Okay, so that's the best way to do it. So for example, 5 over 10 and 3 over 5, which is the largest, which is the smallest? Well, all you simply do is you divide the top by the bottom, because in fractions, this line here is called the divisor. It's the dividing line. So you just take 5 and divide it by 10, and that converts them to a decimal very quickly. Okay, and you can see now here that 5 over 10 is smaller than 3 over 5. So just convert it to decimal and then do it. Now let's look at adding, subtracting and multiplying. Okay, the rules for adding and subtracting are just the same. All right, so let's look at a number with the same bottom number. It's fairly simple. This bottom number, when both of these are the same, that number stays the same. You just add the top numbers. So 3 plus 5 is 8, and the bottom number stays the same, so it's 8 over 10. And like the slide before, you must always simplify your final answer. Okay, so again, you find a common number, which in this case was 2. You divide both numbers by 2, and that gives you 4/5. So 5/10 plus 3/10 is 4/5. And that's how fractions work. Now let's look at the number if it's different at the bottom number. Okay, now you cannot add or subtract these numbers if they're different. Just can't do it. You have to make sure that both numbers are the same, and this is where your equivalent fractions come in. So you make this fraction here equivalent to this fraction. Okay, and you do that by multiplying 5 by 2 to give you 10, and you multiply, because you multiplied that by 2, you multiply the 1 by 2. Okay, and that gives you 2, and you can see now that both numbers are the same. You just subtract 2 away from the 5, and that gives you 3 over 10. Okay, so always make sure the bottom number is the same by converting it. Find that common denominator and change it over. Okay, and you can see the answer is 3 over 10. Can't be simplified anymore, so the answer is 3 over 10. Now multiplying. Multiplying is the easiest of all calculations when working with fractions. You just simply multiply both top numbers and you just multiply both bottom numbers. Okay, so 5 times 3 is 15, 10 times 10 is 100, and then just like before you simplify it. So your final answer is 3 over 20. Now let's look at converting mixed and improper to an improper and back. Okay, so let's go from a mixed to an improper fraction. Now a mixed fraction is a combination of whole numbers and a fraction. Okay, but sometimes, especially when you're doing certain calculations, you need to convert this to an improper fraction so you can carry out that calculation. So how do we do that? Well, it's fairly simple. These are whole numbers. This bottom number in fraction represents the whole value of a shape, okay, and the top part represents how many parts of that shape you have. Okay, so if you just simply take the whole number, you multiply it by the whole value, which is 4, that gives you 8, and then you just add the parts at the top. So 8 plus 3 is 11. Okay, and now what do you do with that 11? Well, it's fairly simple. Because you're working in a denomination of 4, whatever that denomination is, it goes at the bottom. So that then becomes 11 over 4. So from 2 3/4, you've created the improper fraction, 11 over 4. Now let's look at working backwards, going from an improper fraction back to a mixed fraction. Now let's start. The starting point is our 11 over 4 where we left off. Okay. Now you heard me saying that this line in fractions is a dividing line. All you do is just take that 11 and divide it by 4. So 11 divided by 4 gives you 2 remainder 3. So there are 2 4s in 11, which is 8, with 3 left over. So 2 remainder 3. Okay, and then what you do is you just simply put the whole number in, which is the 2, and because we're working in that denomination of 4, you put this 3 over 4. So the answer is 2 3/4. And you can see now that by working in reverse, you're coming back to the same answer again. Okay, and that's how you go from an improper to a mixed, and a mixed and improper. Now, to finish off, let's find the fraction of a value and the fraction of a number. So to find the fraction of a value is fairly simple. Again, you heard me saying this line here is the dividing line. So you just take 3, divide it by 4, and you multiply it by 100, and that gives you a value of 75. So 75 is 3/4 of 100, and hopefully from experience you can see that. Okay, and the final skill you need to learn is write a number as a fraction of another. Okay, so what is 40 as a fraction of 50? You just simply put the smaller value over the top, and then from then, like before, in the slide 1, you simplify it. So in this case, the common number is 10. So you divide both numbers by 10, and that gives you 4/5. So the final answer is 4/5. And that is the 8 skills that you need to prepare for your maths exam. So all you have to do now is practice them. Good luck.